Hello and welcome to the digital edition of the Jerusalem Writers Festival in Mishkenot Sha'ananim. I'm very happy to be here with Nicole Krauss in Brooklyn, New York, and with Zeruya Shalev in Haifa, Israel. And so first of all, I wanted to ask you, before we start talking about writing and books, how is the coronavirus affecting your life right now? How are you with the shutdown? I imagine you're all shut down in your houses now for 5 weeks.
You know, I think at this stage, it's a little bit like being in the middle of a marathon, in that, you know, like you've gotten used to, like, there's a rhythm somehow. And I feel at least used to it. The problem is that we don't know how long it's going to go on. Like, I don't know, like a marathon, you know when it's going to end, you know, like at what mile you are. And I think there's something about just like knowing each week, like, yeah, this is bearable. This is fine.
How many weeks is it for you now in New York?
I think we're in our sixth week, I think.
Okay, like us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But, you know, I mean, and Zeruya will probably have plenty to say about this, but I mean, there are lots of things, I think, in our lives as writers that have trained us for this. It's not that different, right? we spend a lot of time alone, a lot of time not seeing people who we might like to see. I think the difference is like our work days, you know, normally come to an end, and then there's like stimulation. I think that's what I miss the most. It's just like the normal everyday chance experiences in life, whether like tiny things and like visual stimulation of riding the subway in New York, or just like there's so many small surprises and things to note in life. And somehow all of that has been just compressed. And
Zeruya, do you feel that your life has changed now, or is it more or less the same as your usual routine?
Unfortunately, it's more or less the same because, well, it's not always like this, but half a year ago, I put myself in a kind of self-isolation. Yes, in order to finish this novel. And, you know, the last draft of the novel, for me, it takes a lot of energy and so many hours a day. So I had to be in a kind of quarantine since December, actually. So.
Wow. But how many hours a day can you write?
Well, it's the first time in my life. I never used to write so many hours a day, but now sometimes it can be like between 10 and 15 hours every day. And I don't leave my room. I mean, this is, if you can see my jail, this is my jail. And here I'm staying for almost half a year. And the only surprise is why so many people joined me a few weeks ago, and why is the whole world joined my quarantine. It became extremely absurd.
Nicole, yes. Are you working on a new book now?
I finished a book just as all of this was starting, and so it's supposed to come out in November, and so I've kind of had the page proofs and things like that to look over, and that's always a very strange moment in my life as a writer. It's like the being between books when there isn't a project that's sort of taking up my imagination. So I've been trying to start a new book, which is never fun, but
back to back, that's hard.
Well, I mean, you know, I think it's interesting. You learn as time passes, like what you need in order to like be well in life as a writer, you know what I mean? And some of that is a lot of living, right? Like that's something I didn't know when I was young. I kind of had this feeling that one had to always be working and always producing and creating. And I think at some point there was a revelation of like how important just living is and being out there. And so, yeah, I think in some ways I would normally be doing that now, but that's not an option. And so there's also the value of kind of like keeping the mental muscle that allows for fluency, that allows one to write, like keeping it in shape, right? So I'm just trying to ride through that from one book to another. I'm playing. I'm basically playing.
Aren't you afraid? I mean, both of you are going to have books coming out in the next year, let's say, or even half a year, and the world is changing. I think. Are you afraid of the reception of those books, or how the audience will they buy print books or only digital books or audio books? Or do you even think about these things? Or meeting the audience as well will maybe not be an option.
Of course, there is a lot of uncertainty in this situation for everyone. And yes, I admit it's a bit strange from time to time when I'm writing or rewriting. Now it's the time of rewriting, but so many scenes in the book are almost unrealistic, seem to be like almost surrealistic now because they reflect our life before the corona. So it feels a bit unrelevant maybe for a second. But, you know, I try not to think about it because we never know. And I hope people will still be interested in literature after the corona, although the economic situation will be, unfortunately, will be a bit
hard, for sure.
Yes.
When you write, do you think about the other versions or the other media of literature now? Like, do you think about audiobooks? Do you think how it will be read out or how the characters sound, or do you do this anyway?
I used to read my books aloud while writing many years before the audiobooks. I mean, it's part of the writing to read it aloud and to hear the music. But no, it has nothing to do with the audio. And personally, well, I don't mind how to be read. I can just hope that literature will still be a bit relevant in the future.
For sure it will be. Yeah, Nicole.
I think, you know, there's something interesting about being captive in our lives, and it reminds me in certain ways, not in the experience of quarantine, but in this captivity and its relationship to reading. It reminds me of childhood because, like, you know, when I was a kid, like, there were all these experiences I wanted to have and places I wanted to go that I didn't have the independence or the maturity to go to and experience. And so reading was like this form of travel, right? And it was this enormous ability to just expand life from whatever narrow vein I had in Long Island, you know, New York. And it feels to me a little bit, again, like that, in that, and now in a kind of like hugely amplified way, because at least in my imagination, lots of people are reading again. I'd like to believe that. I know everyone's distracted. I kind of think, you know, there's something about the way that books allow you to be accompanied, right? That kind of like pierce through the loneliness, but also just allow you to like get out into life in the world. That just, it reminds me of that again. And I kind of feel also like there's something about this quarantine that's like really sort of autocratic on the imagination. Like, it's like we kind of all are forced to think about this one thing all the time, you know? And it begins to feel a little bit like handcuffs. It's like, this is not the only thing I want to think about. And like, you know, there's all this question of like guilt, and so many of us are in a good situation and there are people in terrible situations, and should we be thinking about this and that? But like, again, in a writer's mind, so much of what we need and require is like freedom, right? Freedom of the imagination, freedom, like, you know, verbal freedom, freedom to say all kinds of things, experiment in all kinds of ways. And there's something about that now that feels like really poignant, because like we're all kind of in this lockdown physically, but it like there's also this mental or imaginative lockdown, right? About what channels of thought we should be allowed to be having. And there's something again about reading right now, and occasionally and trying to write too, which feels like really that possibility of the freedoms is something like highlighted, I think, in a new way.
I think the subjects of writing are going to change dramatically now. In my area, I mean, even on Facebook, so many people are having conspirative theories about this virus, and my last book just came out 2 months ago, like 2 weeks before the shutdown.
Good luck.
Thank you. And since it was all about psychedelic experiences and experiences in consciousness, now I think there's so much like a renaissance of thought about the structure of the universe, of being, of consciousness, all the way to conspiracy theories about this virus. So I'm thinking, will this change the way we tell stories about ourselves and about the world we live in? And Zeruya, I know you're already in the middle of your book right now.
Yes, I'm in such a strange position because my book is already written and I'm just trying to, you know, rewrite it to improve it, but there is nothing I can add now. So I should like it's a pre-corona. It's
the world of yesterday. Stefan Zweig.
Yes, world of yesterday. But actually, I don't think the world will change so much. And I think that, you know, all those issues that I'm dealing with, well, you know, the human experience doesn't really matter if we are afraid from the corona or from other disasters, illnesses, separations. It doesn't really matter. I feel I try to concentrate on the human soul, the relationship in the family and between generations. So yes, I think it will also be the world of tomorrow. I mean, it exists for so many years, maybe 4,000 years even, because when you read, you know, ancient literature like the Bible or Sappho, you can find everything there. You know, all those stories, legends, tales about how people feel. So I'm stuck there.
It's like being a composer with musical notes. It's like there are certain notes right now that we're hearing played over and over in this situation, but they're not like new notes, right? They're like grief and anxiety and loneliness and uncertainty about future. They're about intensity of family relationships, the intensity of intimate relationships. Like these are all the stuff of novels, right? Since novels have been written and beyond, you know, before. And so I don't, you know, I think even something like you raised the notion of like consciousness, although I don't know how weird conspiracy theories have to do with consciousness. I think the weird conspiracy theories, like, you know, that's sort of like the subject of, you know, the internet and what happens when, you know, the world kind of shrinks in the way that it's shrunk and the way that people are connected by the internet and misinformation. And I think that all of that is like the armor, like the sort of the outside, right? The setting, the scene, the time, the fashion, but like the inner workings of what we're interested in as readers, or just generally in art, like in films and anything, music and painting, are those like really essential things that are enduring and don't really change, you know, it's just.
But I mean, like, even in your last book, the last one that came out in Forest Art, there was, I thought, you know, you even dealt with this nistar. I don't know how to say nistar in English, with the unknown, or with the mystic element, or the mystic aspect of the world and of being. And I thought that's what I meant when I meant consciousness. It's like a feeling like perhaps the ecological system or some consciousness, global consciousness, is trying to correct something or tell us something. And
I think that might be magical thinking rather than like, I mean, I think like consciousness as a subject, like all of modernism, like was about, right, the exploration of like subjectivity and consciousness, and like novels are
from a psychological point of view, and not from a spiritual point of view, I think.
I don't know. I'm not sure if I would agree with that. Like, I think that, you know, I think certainly what interested me in Forest Dark was what always interests me, which is like, what is it like to be inside somebody's mind when they're on the cusp of enormous change? And the enormous change that was happening in that novel had to do with like an opening toward an idea of like wonder, right? Of certainly something like less material and more unknown. And I think, you know, like in some ways it's funny, like everything that we're all dealing with right now in our daily lives is a little bit like we're all going through this like crash course of like what it is to live really in a hardcore way with uncertainty. And so much of that book was about that, like, you know, but that's also like literature has been teaching us how to live with uncertainty since forever, you know, like.
Or pain, if I relate to Tzruya's last novel, right? I mean, you both wrote about subjects that seem to me relevant to what the world is going on right now. And we just have a few last minutes, but I would like to hear about what your next books, the ones that you're just finishing, will be about, if you want to.
If I start, it will never end. So maybe we better wait till the book will be finished. But yes, it's too early. It's too early to talk about. I'm writing it for 4 years now, and it was really difficult. I think it was my most difficult writing experience, and I still don't know why. I can't understand it, but I hope it will be worth it. I'm not
can't
sure.
Wait. I can't wait for it. And Nicole?
Yeah, this is
oh, sorry. I just wanted to tell you, Nicole, my dear, that I think it's a wonderful time now for writing, for trying to write. Maybe not to make a commitment now for a new novel, but I think it's a wonderful time to observe and to learn and to gain all those experiences, because it makes everything we know and everything, all this existential uncertainty, I mean, it becomes much more extreme. And, extreme atmospheres, I think, are very interesting for observing. And
for those, yes, for those who are attracted to extremes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think it's probably a good time to be what I was saying before, which is sort of like playing and thinking. And it's interesting, like there are certain stories that I've had with me for years that I haven't known how to write or haven't necessarily been committed to writing, that suddenly come back. I can tell why they're coming back. you know, like the sort of relevance to what is happening now. But there's also part of me that, like, when I write, I really want to escape what's happening now around me. You know what I mean? I want to go somewhere else. And so I have both of those instincts. But the book that's coming out is actually a collection of short stories. So it's my first book of short stories, and it's called To Be a Man. Zeruya and I were talking about what it should be called in Hebrew. That hasn't been decided yet. But maybe. But
Gever.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, Gever.
Yeah. I think it needs to be less universal. I think it's because in English it's really to be a man. But it's largely stories about women, and it was really, I mean, some of the stories are older. I wrote them some years ago, and then I wrote a whole bunch of new pieces for the book, and it was really just such a pleasure to write. It was so surprising, because I think, like Zeruya, I got into a place, you know, after many, many years of writing, and it becomes professionalized. There's a way in which sometimes you can lose the playfulness or the joy. And I think somehow writing stories, because it was just like, you know, like, it's just a story. Like, it's not such a big commitment, you know? But it was really, really a fun thing to live with for a couple of years.
So you find it much easier than writing a novel? Oh,
totally. Because for a novel, I want, like, the entire world to be contained in the novel. It has to have everything in it. Whatever, you know, like whatever is important to me at that time in my life, and the structure has to fit everything, which is why I end up with these novels that are structurally pretty complex, because I just there are more and more things that I want to echo off each other. And this was somehow much more straightforward for me. It was just, I would start something, and if it interested me, I would finish it. And if not, it would get thrown away, and there was no great loss, you know. But it was interesting, because over time, the stories really did begin to be about a few things, the way the novel becomes about a few things. So we'll see. Yeah.
So,
well, good luck.
That sounds very interesting. Now I want to read and understand why then To Be a Man. But
because it's about a lot of men. It's about a lot of men, fathers, lovers, sons. Yeah. But I'll let you read it.